The first thing you notice when you step into the ancient, dust-laden room is the silence. It's a silence so thick it feels like it's pressing down on your chest. The air is stale, heavy with the weight of forgotten years. You can almost taste the history, the secrets that have been locked away here for so long. In the center of the room, a single beam of light pierces the darkness, illuminating a large, ornate wooden chest. It's old, older than anything you've ever seen. The wood is cracked, the metal hinges rusted, but there's something about it that makes your heart race. It's as if the chest is alive, whispering to you in a language you can't quite understand. You take a step closer, your eyes drawn to the intricate carvings on the lid. They depict strange, ancient scenes, men and women with halos, trees that seem to shimmer, and a serpent that coils around the trunk of one of them. The carvings are so detailed, they almost seem to move, to tell a story that's been waiting to be told for centuries. As you reach out to touch the chest, your fingers brush against the cold, rough surface. A shiver runs down your spine. You can feel the power, the energy, pulsating from it. It's like the chest is a gateway to another world, a world where the impossible is possible. You hesitate, your hand hovering just above the lock. What's inside? What secrets does it hold? The chest seems to hum with anticipation, as if it's been waiting for you, for someone brave enough to open it. You take a deep breath, your heart pounding in your chest. This is it, the moment of truth. You grasp the lock, feeling the cold metal against your skin. With a steady hand, you turn the key, and the lock clicks open. The lid creaks as you lift it, the sound echoing through the room. The light from the beam spills into the chest, revealing its contents. There, nestled among layers of yellowed parchment and ancient scrolls, is a single, small tree. It's not a real tree, of course. It's a carving, but it's so lifelike, it almost seems to breathe. The leaves are a deep, vibrant green, and the trunk is twisted and gnarled, as if it's been through 1,000 storms. But it's not just the tree that catches your eye next to it. There's a small leather-bound book. The cover is worn, the pages yellowed with age. You can see the title etched into the leather, The Book of Beginnings. You reach, in your fingers trembling, and pull the book out. As you open it, the pages crackle, and the words seem to leap off the page. They tell a story about a world that was once perfect, a world where humans and God lived in harmony. But something went wrong, something changed. The first chapter begins with a simple sentence. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But as you read on, the story becomes more complex, more mysterious. It talks about a garden, a tree, and a choice that changed everything. The words are like a puzzle, each one fitting together to form a picture that's both beautiful and terrifying. You read on, your eyes scanning the pages, your mind racing. The story is about power, about freedom, and about the choices we make. It's about a God who created the world and then did something no one could have predicted. He gave humans the power to choose, to rule, to be like him. But with that power came a price that would change the course of history. As you read, you can feel the weight of the story, the gravity of the choices that were made. You realize that this is not just a story from the past, it's a story that's still being written, a story that's playing out in the world around you, in the choices you make every day. The room feels even more silent now. The silence pressing down on you, urging you to keep reading, to uncover more of the secrets hidden in this ancient chest. You turn the page, ready to dive deeper into the story, ready to discover what lies ahead. My journey through the complexities of faith had led me to a place where I felt at home. But like any home, it wasn't perfect. There were cracks, leaks, and strange noises from the basement. The process of deconstruction and reconstruction had been tough, but it had given me a new foundation. This foundation was built on the love of a God who gave everything, even his own life, for us. Around this center, I found walls of grace, free will, and a unique kind of sovereignty. It was a good home, but it wasn't without its challenges. One of the biggest challenges came when I was in my final year of college. A representative from a nearby seminary visited our campus to recruit students. He painted a picture of a perfect school, top-notch academics, spiritual formation, and a campus where everyone skipped through the halls together. It was the kind of sales pitch that made everything sound amazing, but it left out the not-so-perfect parts. So I raised my hand and asked, "What is the worst thing about your seminary?" He was caught off guard and reluctantly admitted, "Well, parking can be a nightmare." It was a small but honest admission, and it made me realize that even in matters of faith, honesty is crucial. This experience taught me that no matter how perfect something seems, there are always hidden flaws. The key is to acknowledge these flaws and learn to live with them. In my faith, one of the biggest challenges was understanding free will. Both Calvinism and free will, theism, talk about free will, but they mean very different things. Calvinism believes in something called compatibilism, which means you are free as long as you do what you want. God can determine your desires, and you still act freely because you're doing what you want. For example, if God decides you will reject Jesus, you still freely reject him because you were doing what you wanted, even though God made you want it. This can be confusing, and many people find it hard to understand. On the other hand, free will theism believes in libertarian freedom, which means you have the ability to choose between different options. For example, if you're deciding between going to Mexico or Sweden for vacation, you can choose either one. This idea can also be confusing because it's hard to understand how you could choose differently if everything else stays the same. But if God has the ability to choose not to create the world, then it's possible that we have this kind of freedom too, even if we can't fully explain it. One of the biggest questions in both theologies is where the first sin came from. In Calvinism, God is seen as the ultimate cause of everything, including the first sin. But if God caused the first sin, it raises questions about God's nature. Free will theism says that Adam and Eve chose to sin, but it's still a mystery how a sinless being could choose to do something sinful. Both theologies have their mysteries, and sometimes the best we can say is, it's a mystery. When it comes to salvation, both theologies have their challenges. Free will theism says that people choose to accept or reject Christ, but it's a mystery why some choose to accept and others don't. Calvinism says that God chooses who will be saved, but it's a mystery why God chooses some and not others. Both theologies reach a point where they can't explain everything, and we have to live with these mysteries. One of the biggest criticisms of free will theism is that it might lead to people boasting about their salvation. The idea is that if we have a choice in our salvation, we might think we did something to earn it. But I don't see it that way. If God offers a gift and we accept it, the credit still goes to God. It's like if someone offers you a life jacket when you're drowning. You didn't save yourself. You just accepted the help. The same goes for salvation. We can't take credit for accepting a gift, no matter how small our part was. In the end, I've learned that faith is full of mysteries, and that's okay. These mysteries don't make God or the Bible impossible. They just make us realize that there are some things we can't fully understand. I'm willing to live with these mysteries because they remind me of God's grace and the depth of His love. Even if we can't explain everything, we can still trust that God is in control and that His grace is more than enough. And to the extent that I can perceive such a thing, if I stand before the pearly gates and St. Peter asks me why I was saved, I will say, because I was loved. Hopefully. That'll do. One of the biggest questions in theology is about God's foreknowledge. According to classic theism, God knows everything that will happen in the future. Open theism. A more recent idea says, God doesn't know everything, but is very smart and can predict a lot. Either way, this leads to a big question. If God knew the world would have a lot of evil and that many people would end up in hell, why did He create it? If God creates a world where sin, evil, and hell are certain, is He responsible for them? Alvin Plantinga, a famous philosopher, tried to answer this. He said that a world with free creatures who choose to do more good than evil is more valuable than a world with no free creatures at all. God can create free creatures, but He can't force them to always do good. If He did, they wouldn't be truly free. So some free creatures go wrong, and that's where evil comes from. This doesn't mean God isn't good or powerful. It means He couldn't create a world with only good without removing the possibility of evil. This explanation doesn't make everyone feel better, but it's a possibility. It also fits with the story of Adam and Eve in the Bible, where God gave them a choice, and they chose wrong. So, while God knew some people would end up in hell, He had no better way to create a world with genuine freedom and relationships. Blix, have you ever seen the duck-rabbit image? It looks like a duck or a rabbit, depending on how you see it. This is a simple example of what philosophers call a black. A black is like a lens through which you see the world. Some people see the glass half full. Others see it half empty. Some see suffering as a sign of God's absence. Others see it as a sign of God's presence. This is why some people prefer Calvinism, which focuses on God's power and control, while others prefer free will theism, which focuses on God's love and freedom. It's not about which side is right, but which set of mysteries you find easier to live with. At the end of the day, we choose our theological home because we prefer the mysteries it offers. We don't choose a view because it's proven right, but because we find it more comfortable. The Bible teaches us to focus on the mystery of Christ, the mystery of love. No matter what questions we have, we can trust that God's love and freedom are at the heart of everything. Walking with a limp, Jacob wanted to go home. He had been away for a long time and was nervous about facing his brother Esau. He sent his family and servants ahead, hoping to soften the blow. But as he waited by the Jabbok River, a stranger attacked him. They fought, and the stranger touched Jacob's hip, dislocating it. Jacob was in pain, but held on, demanding a blessing. The stranger asked Jacob's name and then gave him a new one, Israel. This name meant Jacob had struggled with God and won, or at least survived. Jacob limped away, changed by his encounter with God. This is what happens when we meet God. We receive a blessing, but we also walk away with a limp. We are all imperfect, seeking small bits of truth. Theology that doesn't show this imperfection isn't really Christian theology. The certainty itch, we often want to be certain about God. We want to know everything with absolute certainty. This desire for certainty has roots in the story of Adam and Eve, who wanted to be like God. In modern times, this desire for certainty has led to a lot of doubt and skepticism. People want to be sure, but the more they try to be sure, the more they end up doubting. Descartes, a philosopher, tried to prove the existence of God with absolute certainty. He said we should only believe what we can't doubt. This led to a lot of problems because it's hard to be certain about anything. If everything can be doubted, then nothing can be known for sure. This has led to a lot of confusion and skepticism. In Christianity, God is seen as a person, not an object. We can't know God like we know a math equation. We know God as a person, and this means our knowledge is always limited. We are finite beings, trying to understand an infinite God. We can't be certain about everything, but we can know God personally. Think about the people you know best. You might be sure they are kind, but you can't be absolutely certain. You know them through your experiences, and that's the best you can do. The same goes for knowing God. We know God through our experiences and the stories in the Bible. This personal knowledge is the best we can have, and it's enough. The way out of doubt and skepticism is to embrace our limitations. We are finite beings, and that's okay. We can't know everything, but we can know God personally. This means we can be humble and open to learning more. We can trust that God is real and that He loves us, even if we don't understand everything. So the next time you feel unsure about something, remember that it's okay to limp. It's okay to be uncertain. The important thing is to keep walking, to keep seeking God, and to keep growing in your understanding of His love. I used to be so sure I had all the answers, or so I thought. I was young, restless, and reformed. I had a clear set of beliefs that made sense to me, and I was confident in them. But as I grew older, I started to realize that things weren't as simple as I had once believed. My journey in and out of Calvinism has been a winding path, full of deconstruction and reconstruction. And while I found a home along the way, I'm still learning to limp around in it. One thing I've come to understand is that all our knowing is deeply personal. It's not just about facts and figures. It's about the personal commitment we make to the things we believe. This means that our knowledge is always a bit uncertain, and that's okay. In fact, it's more than okay. It's essential. The most meaningful type of knowledge, the kind that really matters, is the kind that can be doubted. It's not a leap of blind faith, but a step onto uncertain ground. We can and should be confident, but we can't be certain. This is why humility, restraint, and moderation in our beliefs about God are not just good manners. They are good theology. When we claim infallible certainty about God, we're missing the point. In our relationships with each other, we don't claim to know everything about the people we love. Why should it be any different with God? Doubt and uncertainty can actually make our faith stronger. They keep it awake and moving, like ants in the pants of faith. Karl Barth once said, "We ought to speak of God. We are human, however, and so cannot speak of God. We ought therefore to recognize both our obligation and our inability, and by that very recognition give God the glory." This is our perplexity. We can't really speak of God, but we can't stop speaking of God. It's a paradox that we must embrace, not solve. The gospel is not just about justification by faith or any other specific doctrine. It's much bigger than that. The key words in gospel language are kingdom, cross, and discipleship. Jesus came to proclaim the gospel of the kingdom. He said, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." This means that God is the true king, and his kingdom has come. All other kingdoms must submit to him. The cross is the heart of the gospel. Jesus didn't come to establish his kingdom by force or violence. He came to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. On the cross, God took on the sin and suffering of the world and forgave it. This is the moment when the kingdom of God overcame the kingdoms of the world. The cross is not just a mechanism for getting us off the hook for our sins. It's the moment when God's love triumphed over all. To enter the kingdom, we must follow Jesus. This means becoming a disciple. The New Testament is a book by disciples, about disciples, for disciples. Discipleship is not an optional add-on to Christianity. It's the core of what it means to be a Christian. Jesus invites us to follow him, to take up our cross, and to die to ourselves. This is how we become part of the kingdom. Discipleship is not about being a super Christian. It's about being a Christian. It's about loving God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and loving our neighbors as ourselves. It's about becoming like Jesus. Both Calvinism and free will theism can produce disciples, but the question is whether they naturally lead to discipleship. For me, the emphasis on choice and the belief that our will matters are essential to gospel-driven discipleship. In Calvinism, the idea of choice is often downplayed. If we don't have a choice, then our will doesn't matter. But Jesus constantly challenges us to make choices. He asks us to follow him, to take up our cross, and to join him in his mission. These are choices we must make every day. Without choice, there is no meaning. Without a will that matters, there is no discipleship. I'm still not sure how to finish the sentence. Young, restless. Young, restless, and reformed just rolls off the tongue. Young, restless, and a free will. Theist doesn't have the same ring to it. But the important thing is that I'm still on the journey. I'm still learning to limp around in my faith. I'm still trying to follow Jesus even when it's hard, and I invite you to join me on this journey. It's not about being certain, it's about being confident and humble, about embracing the risk and uncertainty of faith. It's about becoming a disciple of the kingdom of the crucified King Jesus. You may have the feeling that your choices really matter, but if you look closely, it seems like God's plan is the only thing that truly counts. No matter how much you talk about making your own choices, the truth is, God has already decided if you will follow Jesus, share the gospel, deny yourself, and give up your own kingdom. Your choices don't really matter, at least not in the way we usually think they do. And yet, you're supposed to act as if your choices do matter. You're supposed to run the race of faith as if it's a real race. This puts you in a tricky spot because you have to pretend that your theology and your actions match up, even when they don't. Living faithfully means living with meaning, and living with meaning means making choices. But if you believe that God determines everything, then how can your choices really matter? It's like chasing your own tail, and it can make you feel dizzy. Now, I'm not saying that Calvinism can't produce faithful followers of Jesus. It can, and it does. But to do so, it has to talk and think about your choices as if they matter, even though its core beliefs say they don't. It's a bit like mental gymnastics, and I'm not sure if this kind of thinking naturally leads to being a disciple of Jesus. On the other hand, What about free will theism? Can it naturally lead to being a disciple? I think it can. Even though it has its flaws, free will theism believes that by God's grace, you have a choice and that your will matters. This belief is at the heart of following Jesus. From the very beginning, when God created humans in His image, to the Garden of Eden, to the cross where Jesus died, and to the tree of life in the new heaven and earth, we are invited to give up our own rule and follow Jesus. This is the core of discipleship. Free will theism fits well with this idea because it believes that you have a real choice to make. Now, let's talk about Romans 9. This chapter is often seen as a big challenge to free will theism. It's like a roaring tiger that seems to devour any idea of free will, but I think we need to look at it differently. Romans 9 is a tough, aggressive text, but its aggression is rooted in God's mercy, not in narrowing who can be saved. When you read Romans 9, you have to understand the context. Paul is writing to the Romans, not to us. He's dealing with specific issues that were important to the people in Rome at that time. One of the biggest questions is about Israel. Why has Israel, God's chosen people, mostly rejected Jesus as their Messiah? Has God given up on Israel? Has He replaced them with the Gentiles? Paul is a Jewish follower of Jesus, and he's deeply concerned about these questions. He's trying to explain that God hasn't given up on Israel. Instead, God is using Israel's rejection of Jesus to bring the Gentiles into His family. This doesn't mean that God has unilaterally hardened Israel's hearts. It means that God is using Israel's unbelief to show His mercy to the Gentiles. Paul uses the example of Pharaoh to explain this. Pharaoh was already sinning by enslaving God's people, and God hardened Pharaoh's heart to show His power and glory. Similarly, Israel has already rejected Jesus, and God has hardened their hearts to bring the Gentiles into His family. But this hardening is not permanent. If Israel turns back to God, they can be included again. Paul makes it clear that both Jews and Gentiles are saved by faith, not by their own works. The Gentiles have been included because they believed, and the Jews have been excluded because they didn't believe. This shows that God's mercy and faithfulness are for everyone, not just a select few. In the end, Paul says that God has shut up all people in disobedience so that He can show mercy to everyone. This means that God's plan is to save as many people as possible, not to exclude them. The God of Romans 9 is not a narrow, exclusive God, but a God who wants to show mercy to all. So, when you read Romans 9, don't see it as a text that justifies God's righteousness in choosing some and rejecting others. See it as a story about God's incredible mercy and faithfulness. God is using even the unbelief of His people to bring more people into His family. This is the heart of the gospel, and it's a message that should make us want to follow Jesus more closely. When it comes to the debate between free will theism and Calvinism, it can get really complex sometimes. It feels like you have to pick a side. But maybe, just maybe, there's a middle ground. Maybe we can believe that God is infinitely good and that He also creates people to show His mercy. Maybe we can believe that God looks like Jesus and that we have real choices to make. Maybe we can see both sides and find a way to live with both. In the end, the most important thing is to follow Jesus. Whether you lean towards free will or Calvinism, the goal is to be a disciple of Jesus. So as you think about these things, remember that the heart of the gospel is about God's love and mercy for all people, and that's something we can all believe in. In the world of theology, there are many different views about God and how the universe works. Some people believe that God controls every single thing that happens, from the tiniest atom to the largest galaxy. Others believe that God has given humans free will, allowing us to make our own choices. This chapter explores these ideas and why they matter. Imagine you're walking through a forest and you come across a fork in the path. One path is clearly marked with signs and seems well trodden. The other path is overgrown and looks a bit scary. The well-trodden path represents the idea that God controls everything. This is often called Calvinism. The overgrown path represents the idea that God has given us free will. This is often called Arminianism or free will theism. Calvinism teaches that God has a plan for everything, and nothing can happen outside of that plan. This means that even when bad things happen, they are part of God's plan. Some people find this comforting because it means that God is in control no matter what. However, it can also be troubling because it suggests that God is responsible for everything, including evil and suffering. On the other hand, free will theism teaches that God has given humans the ability to make their own choices. This means that while God is powerful and sovereign, He doesn't control every single thing. Instead, He allows us to choose how we live our lives. This view can be comforting because it means that we have a role in shaping our own destiny. However, it can also be challenging because it means that we are responsible for our choices, and sometimes we make bad ones. One of the key questions in this debate is about God's nature. Is God a being who controls everything for His own glory, or is God a being who loves and gives freely? Some people argue that if God controls everything, then He must be responsible for all the evil in the world. This can make it hard to see God as loving and good. Others argue that if God gives us free will, then He shows His love by allowing us to make our own choices, even if those choices sometimes lead to pain and suffering. Think about it this way. Imagine you have a friend who always tells you what to do. They decide what you wear, what you eat, and even what you think. On one hand, you might feel safe because you don't have to make any decisions. On the other hand, you might feel like you're not really living your own life. Now, imagine you have a friend who lets you make your own choices. They might give you advice, but they don't force you to do anything. This can be scary because you have to take responsibility for your choices. But it can also be liberating because you feel like you're truly living your own life. In the end, both views have their strengths and weaknesses. Calvinism can provide a sense of security and order, but it can also make it hard to understand why God allows evil. Free will theism can provide a sense of personal responsibility and freedom, but it can also make it hard to understand how God is in control. Many people find themselves somewhere in the middle, like Switzerland, in a theological debate. They believe that God is sovereign and in control, but they also believe that God has given humans the ability to make choices. This middle ground can be a bit uncomfortable, but it can also be a place where people can hold on to both the sovereignty of God and the freedom of humans. One of the most important things to remember is that no matter which path you choose, the goal is to understand God better and to live a life that reflects His love and grace. Whether you believe that God controls everything or that God gives us free will, the most important thing is to seek a relationship with God and to live in a way that honors Him. When we think about the future and what happens after we die, it can be a bit scary. Some people believe that death is the end, while others believe in an afterlife. The idea of an afterlife can be comforting because it suggests that there is more to life than what we can see. Some people believe that after we die, We will be with God in a place of perfect love and peace. Others believe that there will be a judgment, and that some people will be separated from God. No one can know for sure what happens after we die, but many people find hope in the idea that God is a loving and just being who will make everything right in the end. Whether you believe in a heaven and hell or a different kind of afterlife, the most important thing is to live a life that reflects the love and grace of God. In the end, the path you choose is yours to walk. You can believe that God controls everything, or you can believe that God gives us free will. You can even believe that there is a middle ground. What matters most is that you seek to understand God and to live a life that reflects His love and grace. No matter which path you choose, the journey is worth it. As we close this journey, it's like standing at the edge of a cliff, looking back at the path we've walked, and gazing out at the horizon, wondering what lies ahead. We've explored some deep and sometimes challenging ideas about God, faith, and what it means to follow Jesus. From the early doubts and questions to the profound insights and revelations, each step has brought us closer to understanding, not just the teachings, but the heart of the gospel. We started with a blind date with Calvinism, where the strict doctrines of predestination and sovereignty seemed to paint a picture of a distant, unapproachable God. But as we delved deeper, we found that the story of God is far more complex and beautiful than any one doctrine can capture. We encountered the problem of hell and the girl in the red jacket, which forced us to confront the harsh realities of suffering and the need for a God who is both powerful and loving. We explored the idea of a crucified God, a God who chooses to enter into our pain and suffering, to walk with us in our darkest moments. This God is not one who sits on a throne distant and detached, but one who is intimately involved in the world and in our lives. We discovered that the glory of God is not found in power and control, but in love. Love that is so profound it can transform even the most broken and lost. We wrestled with the concepts of free will and sovereignty, trying to understand how a God who is all-powerful can also allow us to make choices. The idea of kenosis, or self-emptying, helped us see that God's power is not about control, but about giving, even to the point of vulnerability. This kind of sovereignty is not about dominance, but about relationship, a God who invites us to participate in the ongoing story of redemption. We faced the monsters in the basement, the dark and hidden parts of ourselves and the world, and found that even in those places God's light can shine. We learned that walking with a limp is not a sign of defeat, but a sign of grace, a reminder that we are all in this together, and that God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. We explored the tensions within the Christian tradition, from the young, restless, and reformed to the more progressive and inclusive. We found that the gospel is big enough to hold all of us, with all our questions and doubts, and that the journey of faith is not about having all the answers, but about being open to the questions. In Romans 9, we encountered the challenging idea of God's election, but we also saw that this election is not about exclusion, but about inclusion, a call to a deeper and more intimate relationship with God. We learned that the gospel is not just a set of beliefs, but a way of life, a call to follow Jesus in the way of love and justice. As we look to the future, we carry with us the lessons and insights we've gained. We are not the same people we were when we started this journey. We are more aware of the complexity of faith, more open to the questions, and more committed to the path of love and discipleship. The road ahead may be uncertain, but we know that we are not alone. We walk with a God who is with us, who has been with us all along, and who will continue to be with us, no matter where the journey takes us. So, as we close this book, let's take a moment to reflect on the journey we've shared. Let's hold on to the hope and the love that we've discovered, and let's continue to walk the path of faith, one step at a time, with open hearts and open minds. The adventure is far from over, and the best is yet to come.